Okay, I need to start the meeting out with a statement. Pursuant to the applicable law and his determination that attendance by remote means is necessary because an in-person meeting is not practical nor prudent due to the declared public health disaster caused by COVID-19. This meeting was being conducted by videotape. The meeting was recorded and is available at http://www.downtownhydeparkchicago.com and on YouTube. I'd like to thank everybody for attending the meeting this afternoon. And if you could please mute yourself, and so as the presenters are talking, we don't hear dogs barking or children coming in the background or all the other fun things that we've all observed over the past 3 years by Zoom calls. My name is Mike McGarry, and I'm serving as the chairman of the Reconstitution Committee for Special Service Area 61. Special Area 61 was established in 2013 and has been operating ever since for the betterment of the business district. I was a member of the original formation committee back then, one of the original commissioners, and was selected to be the initial chairman of the commission. SSAs have a lifespan of 10 years, and the time has come in order to reconstitute the SSA for an additional 10 years. The purpose of today's meeting is to educate you in the process and answer any questions that you may have. There will be a second community meeting in person next Thursday, May 16th at Nichols Park Fieldhouse beginning at 5:30. You'll be hearing from three presenters today. Mark Roschen from the City of Chicago, Scott Goldstein from Teska Associates, who's been assisting the committee in the Reconstitution, and Rod Sawyer, who's the program manager of the SSA. Rod, do you have a list? Can you put up a listing of the Reconstitution Committee?
Yes, it's up now.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to thank the members of the committee who are on this list and also who have joined this call. The SSA 61 has done a fantastic job in protecting the business interests of the 53rd Street and 55th Street business corridor. And much has been accomplished during the past years. And it's important that these programs that have been so successful continue, and that they continue with a reliable funding source. And that's the SSA 61 being reconstituted. So at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Mark from the City of Chicago.
All right, thanks, Mike. I am Mark Roschen, and I'm an assistant commissioner at the Department of Planning and Development. Our unit oversees the SSA program.
Slideshow. Yeah, you want to get slideshow?
It's covered up. There we go. Okay. Okay. So thanks for inviting us out. The SSA program, clean, green, and safe are this is our mantra. You'll see that the services that are eligible through the program kind of lead to these three items and criteria. We want to assure the public that SSAs are locally initiated. In other words, each SSA starts with an application that's submitted to our department. It's a resource, an economic development resource that's available if a neighborhood decides to pursue it. It is a self-imposed tax. And so because of that, we do require a process to go through to inform the public. That's why we're requiring the community meetings today and next week to inform the public and also to answer any questions that may come up about the program in general. SSAs are basically the city granting its taxing authority to the local area, and they are used to fund services that are above and beyond what the city is able to do on a general basis. Each SSA has a board of commissioners that are appointed by the mayor, and generally they are property owners or other community members that have represent other interests in the community to help augment the perspectives that the property owners bring to the commission. The commission decides the budgets each year for the SSA and are basically the city's eyes and ears out on the street. We also contract out with service providers. So in this case, SECC is the local service provider for SSA61. That's on a year-by-year basis, but they've been very successful in managing SSA61 since inception 10 years ago. The SSA program is enabled by a state legislation. It goes back since 1977. We also have city ordinances and DPD policies that elaborate and have further refinement of the state's statute for SSAs. We currently have 57 SSAs across the city, almost 500 commissioners. The initial term for an SSA is 10 years, as is the case here. We do allow term extensions for up to 15 years, but I think we're looking at 10 years in this example. Correct me if I'm mistaken. But altogether, the SSA program generates almost $34 million a year in private investment that goes back into commercial areas across the city. So it's a pretty substantial program. And we think it's what leads to just unique spaces for our commercial areas and inviting areas across the city. The median budget is $462,000, and the largest is State Street with a $3.6 million budget. We have 7 budget categories. The first 5 are direct services and programs. Categories 6 and 7 are SSA management and personnel, basically administrative costs. We do not get involved. We do monitor what the commission recommends for their budget, but we don't micromanage how the commission would like to spend the budget dollars that they come up with. We do, however, make sure that the administrative expenses in categories 6 and 7 do not exceed 30% of their levy budget. And that's part of the state statute. So we're just looking out to make sure that the budgets that are submitted fall within the legal framework of the SSA program. So here's some examples of funding that the SSAs can provide. So it's a lot of visual, a lot of identifiers for the community, public art, special events, just things that really make an area pleasing for shoppers and residents alike to enjoy being in that area. So here's a breakdown of the different line items within the categories. We do allow for custom line items within these general categories. So it's a flexible program, and so there are many different ways that SSAs can provide benefits to the community. Category 5, public health and safety. Just want to point out that as how the SSAs can be flexible. Of course, in 2020, there was a major shift. SSAs were able to respond to the pandemic and were able to reallocate funds midstream during the year, generally away from special events, obviously, that weren't happening, and they could put those into aid and rebates, et cetera, for individual businesses or for helping them with supplies that they might need during the pandemic. So that's a pretty flexible program to adjust to the needs of the community. So here's a look at the SSAs combined in an aggregate way. The 2 largest categories are customer attraction and public way aesthetics. So basically, again, a lot of visual things for the area, banners, also keeping the sidewalks clean, attracting customers to the area, creating unique spaces. That's what those 2 categories do. I want to point out category 5, public health and safety. It's up to about 13% overall of SSA spending. Just a few years ago, it was about 5%. So that is an increasing area. And then finally, categories 6 and 7 are the green and the dark blue. They make up about 22% overall of the SSA levy. The maximum is 30%. So some SSAs do have 30% admin. Others have 15%, but the average overall is about 22%. Here's a breakdown of the individual line items that are used by the most SSAs. So landscaping is used by 54 of the 57 SSAs, special events, safety programs. So you get the idea. So again, visual amenities are important. So I want to just touch on the roles and responsibilities. We have a system that has different parties involved, and it's kind of creates a checks and balance system, if you will. So I mentioned the SSA Commission earlier. They are recommended by the mayor, confirmed by City Council. They're the ones that actually come up with the tax rate each year, the budget each year, and who the service provider will be. And they're the ones that they have the authority to make budget modifications during the year, as I mentioned. They review the finalists for vendors and select the winning vendors for the contracts, and basically oversee the finances of the SSA. So they'll monitor expense reports and authorize payments to be made on behalf of the SSA. So it's basically an overview function guiding the SSA. We know that everybody's on the commission is a volunteer, so we appreciate their service, but we don't expect them to get involved in the day-to-day business of administering the SSA. So that's what we have the SSA service provider staff for, to manage those activities. They're the ones that go out and solicit submissions for contracts from proposals from vendors, and review those, kind of vet them, and then present the finalists to the commission for their final approval. The service providers also are the entity that actually signs the contracts with the vendors. So the contract is between the vendor and the local service provider, not with the city of Chicago. So that creates a lot of some flexibility in who your commission is able to enter into contracts with. And then the service provider will also provide reports to us and to your commission as well. So I mentioned that there's state SSA tax law that created SSAs. There's two types of city ordinances. Open Meetings Act, because the commissions are an extension of the city and mayoral appointees, all of the actions for SSAs are considered public and must abide by the Open Meetings Act. Same way with any written information, it falls under Freedom of Information Act, so the public can submit FOIA requests and to look to be able to review any SSA documents. So we also have city and county ethics ordinances, which require commissioners to file on an annual basis with both the city and the county. So the first type of city ordinance is the establishment ordinance. That's the ordinance that we'd be looking at the end of this process. So it would be a renewal. It defines the SSA boundaries. It sets the tax rate cap. So you're going to hear about that today. That's important because if you want to change any of these items, you need to go back through the community process to do that. So basically, this sets the parameters for the next 10 to 15 years for the SSA. On an annual basis, we also have annual budget ordinances or levy ordinances, which authorize the levy to be assessed to each of the pins within the SSA. The levy is assessed as part of the county tax bill. I mentioned that we do require 2 community meetings. Again, this is all part of ensuring that the public is aware of the proposal. We also require signatures of support from at least 20% of the PINs within the SSA. Again, we want to make sure that there is a base level of support before we go ahead to proceed with drafting legislation for the SSA to continue. That would happen in the fall. There is a formal public hearing that will be held this fall at City Hall, and that is part of the state statute. And again, I'm not going to go through all of these, but just know that our role is to make sure that there is public accountability with our role in overseeing the program through the SSA commissioners, the service provider, and then the performance of the SSA throughout the year as well. What I want to focus on is first the legislative aspect, how the different entities relate to each other. The SSA Commission is approved by City Council. The Commission then recommends the service provider agency. DPD then enters into an agreement on an annual basis with the service provider, and then it's the service provider that enters into subcontracts, basically vendor contracts with all of the SSA vendors. So that bypasses any city procurement process, so it makes it much more flexible to operate and to select who you want to have as your vendors for the SSA. Secondly, on the funding side, the tax levy is part of the Cook County tax bill. The taxes are paid to the county treasurer. The county treasurer then separates out all of the SSA portion of the tax bill. Those go to the city comptroller. And then a different fund is set up for each SSA in the comptroller's office. SSA funds never go to the city's general account. They only go to the dedicated SSA funds. And then on a weekly basis, the comptroller sweeps each of the SSA funds and then disperses those deposits and collections to the local SSA bank account on a weekly basis. So the city is not holding on to SSA collections for more than 1 week, and 100% of the SSA collections go back to the SSA. Finally, here's a timeline of where we're at. Originally, we're responding to an application that came in November. And during the time since November, the consultant has been gathering research. We're holding the community meetings now. In June, on June 9th is when the actual application is due to our office. We will review it over the summer. And if they pass the criteria, we will then introduce ordinances in the fall. First, there has to be a public hearing that'll be held around November 1st this year. Pending the hearing outcome, there will then be the formal ordinance to continue the SSA, and that must be approved by City Council in December and filed with the county by the end of December. If we miss that deadline, then there would be no levy next year. So it's important that we stick to this timeline. This will technically be considered a new SSA. The current SSA expires at the end of the year. What that means is that the first tax collection for next year will be received in anytime after July of 2024, not in the first installment, but 100% will be coming in the second installment next year. So I know that Scott is going to be going into more detail, but that's our overview, and I'll be available to answer questions throughout and after the meeting as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Scott?
Hello, everyone. I'm Scott Goldstein from Teska Associates. I'm here with Benito Garcia. We are helping the SSA through the process and the application. So I'm going to share an overview of the SSA process in a little bit more detail than what that reinforces what Mark just presented. So let me share my screen. Okay. That work? Okay. So as Mark just presented, an SSA is a designated area where property owners choose to provide additional services for the benefit of residents, merchants, and visitors funded by a dedicated property tax. It's a very small tax compared to the overall property tax that are collected each year. And as Mark said, all funds are collected and spent based on local priorities. All of the money raised in the SSA stay in the SSA. So the community funds the SSA. Funds provide services and improvements, and businesses and residents benefit from this investment. And you can see it in downtown Hyde Park. Of the improvements that have been made, the murals, promoting local businesses, organizing events, the farmers market, for example, the banners, those are time to be replaced. The renewal of the SSA will provide the funding to do that. As Mike McGarry said at the beginning of the meeting, what the SSA does is a very predictable funding stream. Each person pays a little bit, it adds up together and provides the budget by pulling those resources together. This is a brochure that's available if you'd like a copy of it. People who are not here today, it's a great thing to hand out either electronically or in print of what the SSA does and why it's important to continue that. The SSA, as Mark said, really focuses on visible improvements, and it's critical to providing these services, cleanliness, beautification. If there's garbage out on the sidewalks, people really don't want to come back to that area. While individual businesses may pick up that in front of their business, this provides consistency across the SSA boundaries. So this is the new boundaries, the new proposed boundaries for the that the advisory committee recommends. It's 53rd Street, South Lake Park Avenue, and then east on 55th Street. There are 7 properties on the north side of 53rd Street, east of the viaduct, that the advisory committee is removing due to less services in that area. And so this would be the new boundary of the SSA. We'll have discussion in a few minutes if there's questions about that. In terms of services, customer attraction, you can see some of the graphics and services here from social media and other sources that we're highlighting. Those services include the website, special events, social media, decorative banners, print materials, branding efforts. In terms of events, the farmers market, seasonal festivities, culture, live entertainment. So the idea is to bring people to downtown and hopefully downtown Hyde Park, and hopefully once they've been there, if they've other parts of the city or country, they'll come back, eat at local restaurants, visit other businesses. And so that becomes a virtuous cycle of bringing people back to downtown Hyde Park. The small things are really important: the landscaping, the trash receptacles, public art, sidewalk power washing. All these things keep the area attractive and welcoming and create a sense of community among the businesses and residents that call downtown Hyde Park home. Public spaces, public transit enhancements, viaduct signage, cleaning the viaduct, Nichols Park improvements. Those are all things that are really important to the area, and part of the funds of the SSA are used to support those services and those visible improvements. As I mentioned, all the money stays within the SSA. The SSA Commission approves the contracts, approves the vendors, so it can really try to provide the most efficient way to provide those services by managing that contracting process. What we've heard so far in this process, in terms of the strengths of downtown Hyde Park, the spring cleaning and garbage remediation is really important. The farmers market is successful. Flower planting adds nice aesthetics. These are all comments that have come up in prior meetings. Marketing and branding have been fruitful and reaches a wider audience. Diverse businesses in the corridor have created a sense of place. 53rd Street, 53rd Street TIF is acting as a catalyst. So SSAs and TIF kind of go hand in hand for different types of expenses. Large crowds have patronized local festivals, and a lively district exists, a variety of activities. So those are all things we want to build on. In terms of challenges, need to make sure programming is kept up to date, ensuring businesses can handle the foot traffic. There's not enough space sometimes. The vacancies are a concern. SSA benefits are more limited east of the viaduct. The properties outside the TIF are paying most. So these are some of the concerns that we're addressing along the process. If you can take the needs assessment survey, we're going to keep it open until the day after the next community meeting. If you want to scan that QR code, or you can get to it, I believe, from the SEC website, and it's a real quick survey. I think it's 7 questions to help inform how the SSA allocates its funding. So I'll leave this up for a second more. Okay. In terms of the process, just reinforcing what Mark said earlier, we are essentially in the 4th stage on this slide, which is really working on, or the 3rd and the 4th, the 2 community meetings, completing the district plan, which is submitted to the city, SSA boundary and legal description, and that application along with signatures. So the city requires, this is not in the state law, but city policy to make sure there's local support. This city requires that signatures of taxpayers of 10% of PINs. PINs are property identification numbers. So if, for example, a building may be on 1 PIN, 1 parcel, or maybe on more than 1 condominiums, each condominium is a separate PIN. And so what the city wants to require is that 10%, at least signatures represent at least 10% of those properties by June 9th, and another 10% by August 1st. And that shows that there's a level of support among the taxpayers in the area to support the renewal of the SSA. So that's the end of the presentation, and turn it back to Mike.
Thank you, Scott. Rod, there you are. You're up.
And share. Start. Okay, I'm going to go rather quickly through these slides. What I'd like to do is kind of an overview. I'm going to show you a number of pictures, really, of the life of 53rd Street. The thing I like about this, and the thing I'm going to present you in the pictures, is I was involved in most of these events. So some of them, while they don't directly relate to the SSA, you'll kind of see a timeline of how they now support the SSA. So I'm going to skip through some of this. We've already gone through that. First of all, I'd like to mention my commissioners. In the 13 months that we've been together, we've gone through a lot. There is a lot to accomplish. Some of the names on here I've worked with, I can now say decades.
Oh, hey, Mauricio, I'm fine. How are you?
So they'll have an appreciation for some of the pictures that I'm beginning to show. As I said, some of them will predate the SSA. They do not predate the TIF. So let's go ahead and get to the pictures, and we can talk about that. But I do want to mention something about the difference between a TIF and an SSA. A lot of people across me think that they're the same, and Mark, you know as well, they're different instruments. To me, they're different tools. TIFs are generally used for larger infrastructure types of projects. They freeze property taxes at a level. TIFs can be collateralized for loans. The initial TIF lifespan is about 23 years. It's generally funding is project-based, and TIF boards are not required. As we saw in the previous view with the commissioners, for SSAs, a governing structure Board of Commissioners is required. So I'm going to take you back in some of the days before then. And people from the university will recognize this. This is pre-Harper Court. And going back down this memory lane, I remember before there was an SSA, there was a TIF. And all of what we see now down 53rd Street was still on the drawing board. So this is construction, and this is what TIFs fund, large scale projects. I'm going to take you to this one. This is the McMobile site where View 53 is, excuse me. Now, it did not receive TIF funding, but these are the types of large projects you use for TIFs. Special service areas. We love our 4th on 53rd. We have supported that. Parade has been going on for much longer than the SSA or even the TIF has been in, but we're proud to be able to sponsor events for the 4th, and the 4th on 53rd is one of those things. These are things that not only SSA support, but I've been personally involved in them. I've marched in these parades. Most of these pictures are mine, either from an observer or participant. And we can see other pictures. We will see this in about a month and a half on the parade. One picture I found in particular, you know, sometimes real tall guys with funny ears march in our parades. So I wanted to show this, our politicians march in our parades. So these are the very personal pictures. I've participated in this parade. I've taken pictures of the events within the SSA footprint or the TIF footprint. So these are the things that we do with SSAs. This is some of the things that also, because of the projects funded by the TIF, it's allowed us to do. Now, this festival predates the SSA, but we have also funded festivals as well. And you can see some of the things that we now are able to do with SSAs. This is probably the precursor to Brewfest. It's outgrown us. This is where the View 53 is, or the McMobile site. But pulling up these pictures reminded me over the years of the things we're able to do. And for the things that still fit, it's really a pleasure to fund these things and take a part in them. I'm also on the festival. You see a face painting. These are programs we're thinking about with our market. And of course, you're Hyde Park, you recognize the person in this picture. But these are things that we've been able to enjoy up and down 53rd Street, 55th Street in the Hyde Park Shopping Center, and things we look to continue with that. You've seen that we've also helped out with music. And some of these things we may not have sponsored directly, but we've participated in offering our help, our assistance. Staff and the personnel here has been fantastic. It's not that Diane has to make us go to these things. We, you know, are able to have fun on our job. We see the music, supporting local businesses. You see Phil here with the chamber, you see board members, you see staff. Our local businesses mean the world to us. Last night, there was a film viewing about our small businesses. And they told us the importance of supporting them, not just as patrons, but more or less with infrastructure support, with programmatic support. So our local businesses have really benefited from our SSA. Now, this is a picture that's not within the SSA, but it's visible within there. And the artist, Nico Washington, this is actually for my son. He's a junior. I say, okay, for your friend, you need to sign this. But we see this right off of 53rd Street. So it's not just within the SSA, but things that surround it. It makes the programming, it makes the businesses, it makes things more personal for all of us. Of course, you've seen this for Hyde Park holidays. That was in a slide that Scott presented. Those ice sculptures were fantastic. It was wonderful walking down 53rd Street and watching the kids play on top of them, watching families take pictures. But these are the kinds of things that we support, if not, us directly, but through our partners with UC Commercial Real Estate. Of course, our farmers market. I'm going to go a couple down. We all know Marsha's music. Marsha's very popular here, and to have her at our farmers market and have the kids there was such a treat, not just for the people in the market shopping, but for the kids and the community. And we also, with the Hyde Park School of Dance, that was a fantastic, energetic performance that they put on. The support with the SSA. Of course, there's Clean Slate, our vendor that cleans our streets, our trash. Scott, you saw the bike path. This is the bike racks. This is our branding. And another thing, our flower baskets, those are beginning to come online soon, as that contract was approved. We're going to do something with our banners. That was a program we had to pull back on last year until we could get secured funding. Mike, as you mentioned, a secured, stable funding source. So we'll be back on track with that. And that's pretty much my presentation. I just wanted to personalize what Mark and what Scott have done, because as many of you that are on this Zoom call have known you for a long time. You've watched my kids grow up. You've watched me celebrate a lot of personal anniversaries, but part of that was the commercial district and many of the stores here in Hyde Park. So, Mike, it's back up to you. You're on mute.
How about now? How embarrassing. Thanks, Rod. Appreciate the update of some of the great things that the SSA has done over the past 10 years. It really makes a difference. And I honestly believe it's one of those things that these services that it provides, the garbage pickup, the flower baskets, the banners, the beautification projects of the business district, those would be missed if without a stable funding source. And again, really, that's what the SSA is looking to provide. Rod, Mark, and Scott, if you could unmute, and if anybody has any questions or comments, please raise your hand in the chat. Jane, I see your hand is up.
Hello.
Hello.
I have a question about the TIF and its relationship to the SSA. When the SSA was first proposed 10 years ago, the alderman at the time, Will Burns, promised to either share TIF funding or something like that. And Mike, I'm going to ask you if you perhaps remember, but for much of the 10 years, that funding never came over. And so there was a shortfall for a lot of these years. What was that, and will that be an issue going forward?
Well, the shortfall was not on the SSA side. I think the shortfall is on the TIF side.
Right, and the for whatever reason, those TIF funds never made it into the SSA budget. They never were transferred to the account of the SSA. So what was that?
Well, there will be TIF funds coming to the SSA. Rod, do you want to start by addressing that? And then Mark, maybe you have a comment to add as well.
Mark could better address that. My understanding of that is that TIF funds don't automatically come. TIF funds come when the mayor and the city council make up a budget and they declare a TIF surplus. Only then do TIF funds come in. In terms of TIFs coming specifically to SSAs, we're a taxing body. So if one of us gets it, all of us gets it, or none of us gets it. That's my understanding. Mark?
Yeah, Rod, that's the perfect way to explain it. As going back to the 10 years ago, it was just prior to when I started with the SSA program. But my understanding was that there was talk of there was a request to try and reclaim all SSA levies that went into the TIF. That's not how the TIF program works. I think there was promises made, but there was never an agreement with the department to do that. We do have the TIF surplus as a way of giving back to the various taxing districts, including SSAs, but there is no direct like one-to-one refund or annual allotment from a TIF to an SSA.
So is the SSA money commingled with the TIF money and then it's pushed out into, how does that work exactly?
So
From the city
SSAs,
standpoint,
so SSAs are just like the Board of Education and other taxing districts that are listed on your tax bill. And when there's a TIF in place, the taxing districts retain what is available at the base level. So when the TIF was created, they pay in and they collect their EAV based on that pre-TIF amount. And as the value of the land increases, of the property increases, the increment portion goes to the TIF. And it does fund other projects within the TIF boundaries. Those funds can't leave the TIF. And, again, only when there is a TIF surplus will the taxing districts receive a rebate of the levy that each of them put into the TIF.
that confused me, but. So the SSA is bound up into the TIF monies? Is that what you're saying?
So
Neither, yeah, they're separate, Jane. They don't touch each other unless a TIF surplus is declared. So and Mark, I mean, he was on point in terms of that. What happens? Let's say your property is valued at $100, and that's where the TIF is set. Then when that property value goes to $110, that $10 go into the TIF. Let's say it doubles to $200. That $100 goes into the TIF, but the property stays valued at $100. So the only thing we can do is get our money out of the $100. And that's the SSA, that's the city, that's the board, but the rest of that goes into the TIF fund.
And only if there's a declared surplus in the TIF fund will you get some sort of excess. Is that the way you have to think about it?
that's correct.
Okay.
It's all returned back to the taxing bodies that were part of the district. So SSAs get it, the Board of Education, the county, anyone that shows up on your tax bill, that surplus is then distributed out to those taxing bodies.
I see. Okay. So for the last 10 years, how much of that distribution came to the SSA apart from its base budget or base tax? How many years? 1 year?
Well, on your tax bill, it tells you what goes into the TIF and what goes into the SSA.
No, was there any surplus apart from just 1 year?
My understanding.
Only 1 year,
1 year, yeah.
and that was this year. That's it.
Okay, thank you.
Zoe?
Hi, yes. I had a couple of quick questions and I'm happy to follow up about them too. But the main thing, I'll put them in the chat as well, but I was just wondering if someone could elaborate a little bit on the differences between the boundaries of the last 10 years and the new boundaries and how exactly those will be changing. I know you guys showed the new map really briefly, but just what are the big differences? And then also if you could go into I was unsure if you guys have names of service providers or if there are any specifics you could give to those as well.
Okay, well, I'll start off with your map question. You know, we really looked at it from the standpoint of where's the need. And we kind of determined that the 53rd Street east of the viaduct, it doesn't really have a lot of need. It's still one of the main entries into the business corridor. But with one primary property owner, kind of that area kind of takes care of itself. One of the more important business areas we think is 55th Street. With the advancement of the Obama Presidential Center, that could be a very important gateway to bring people from the center into the neighborhood and into the business district in order to visit our restaurants, visit our retail, visit our shopping, and those types of services. So that's kind of where we're thinking in terms of the map going. And the second part of your question, Zoe, was what?
Specific, do you guys have names of specific service providers, or who do you work with who's a service provider?
Well, the Southeast Chicago Commission is the service provider, and they've hired Rod in order to kind of run the programs for the district.
Okay, got it. So the main boundary differences are 55th Street?
The main difference is taking away 53rd Street east of the viaduct on the north side.
Okay. Great. And do you guys have funding numbers as well? That was my only other big question.
As far as budget goes?
Yeah, in terms of last year versus this year, how much funding was received in the last 10 years versus what will be received if it is approved for another 15 years?
Scott, do you have that forecast handy?
We haven't, the city requires a 5-year forecast. We haven't done that yet. We typically look at what the essentially what the past 5 years growth rate is. It has not been very high because the much of it is in the TIF, but I can either Rod, if you could share the current budget, or I can pull it up.
Okay. So I like to
share the screen, but I think it's just what the total amount is.
Okay, you are, I believe you are sharing the screen. You're able to share if you've got. I can give you the real quick numbers of what they are without the breakdowns. I believe the prior year was about $273,000, and the year this current year is about $296,000.
Okay.
Those are rough numbers. But
thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, thank you everybody for your time this afternoon. As I mentioned before, we will be having a second community meeting on the 16th at 5:30 at the Nichols Park Fieldhouse. I appreciate your time, and I appreciate the commissioners being on the call as well too.
Just
Thank
quick
you very much,
announcement
everybody.
before you all leave. If you didn't sign in the chat, if you can put your name and affiliation so we get that correct. The in-person meeting will be the same content as the Zoom. You're certainly welcome to attend, but it will be the same content as today's community meeting.
Okay.
I want to give a shout out to Akia Chanel. I first met her because I'm a Hyde Park resident. We covered the beat, and seems like I work with her now more than